not there as much, right? I actually was this close to not going to college. Okay, and to give you an example, and this is a personal story, is that my parents were upper middle class in New York City, and through various fortune and investments from a business manager, we ended up filing for bankruptcy, losing our business in New York City, losing the house. But FAFSA says I'm upper middle class, so you don't qualify to go to college. I graduated high school a year early from Bronx Science, which is a magnet school. So the concept of not going to college was a pretty drastic time, right? But it actually helped me learn about grit. I was like, no. One of the reasons why I graduated high school early is so I can go to college and actually pick all the classes I wanted to take, whatever that may be. And so I persisted, and this is before like really internet was there, so I'm part vampire that way. I remember calling all the schools, stating the situation, and they're like, hey, sorry, you can apply next year. I was like, wait, I graduated high school early to go to college a year early, not to go with it, and so forth. And Georgia Tech, I was able to convince someone that this is a temporary situation. And from there, I went to Georgia Tech, and now I'm on the board of Georgia Tech. Like, what a reversal of fortune in many ways. So that's more on a personal level, but it gave me a lot of grit to be like, I can do this. How is it compared to some of these other things and challenges I have faced? Another example is in the year 2000, there was the dot-com bubble that happened. And I didn't go, some of the offers got retracted and so forth. I ended up, but my first choice was applied material, so I was very happy to go attend there. Then it went up, and then the financial bubble happened in 2007. And I was, or 2009. And I was at a startup, had to lay off my whole team. And I knew I will also get laid off because of all the different advancements and so forth. I had engineering, program management, product management reporting to me. And I went home and I was doing like what if scenario, future casting, like what are the different things that may happen, and I was writing it all down. My husband, Nick, who I was very astute individual, was like, Sophia, what are you doing? I was like, well, I'm thinking about if I don't find a job in a certain time frame, these are different course of action. And he's like, oh, get rid of our car, do these other things. And then on the very bottom, it said, give Tanner, my golden retriever, our golden retriever, to a family. And he's like, did you just put Tanner on the list? He's family. You can't give family. What? On the other side, second page, it's like, divorce Nick, too expensive to be married. Right? Kids, have the kids to the grandparents, too expensive to have kids. And I was just like, no, that's not what I meant. But it's just so my process. So that gives you also the depth of what I was considering, that I would consider giving my dog away, right? But from there, I landed at Apple.
And unemployment in
the Valley was 12-14%. So sometimes the downturns are also the upturns.
So can you talk a little bit more about your process? I mean, we mentioned a few things here. Your idea about the importance of understanding the structure of knowledge. But I think back away from your third grade experience.
So very early on, third grade, I just loved to read, and at the time, I was really into fairy tales and other stories of that kind of thing. And I remember going to the library, and right next to fairy tale was mythology, and next to mythology was religion. So I just literally started reading different sections of the library. But it meant that whatever you're interested in, how can you acquire new knowledge at the edge of that? The intersection of fairy tale as well as, fairy tale to mythology, and mythology to religion. Is basically what are the things that you're interested in, have become well-versed or knowledgeable about, and then start looking at the edges, right? And as you do that, your interest then becomes bigger and larger associated with it. And the reason I say that is that actually really helped me in how I perceive my own career. My background was mechanical engineering, material science in semiconductor processing, which I was the lead designer in chemical vapor deposition, and I made a decision that I wanted to go to consumer electronics. So a little bit different, right? A little bit different. And I remember applying to the large consumer electronic companies, Samsung, LG, Apple, and so forth, and I told them what I did, and go, we actually do not know what you're saying. Those are English words individually, but together did it actually make sense? So part of it is I understood the importance of understanding your audience and how to tell that story, as well as what are things I need to address so I'm more marketable there, and just go through that. And so whether it be changes within the company or different within or outside the company, is I basically started learning about what are the different overlaps. So 70% of the work that you're doing, you should be very confident in. 30%, and this is a ratio that works for me. People may have different areas of risk and learning curves and comfort that way. 30% is something new that's on the edge of where you are, all right? And so then from there, we're to consumer electronics. So mechanical engineering, material science, to electrical engineering, firmware, from firmware to CS, CS to data science to machine learning to AI, and where I'm here. And so the journey is like, how do I increase the percentage of my core work to be in the area that I want and become an expert? So I was able to move the expertise that way.
It's kind of ironic, right, that at third grade, you're reading the library, you're thinking about the structure of knowledge, and then you end up at Microsoft and the knowledge graph, and that's kind of a central point when it comes about to AI, which is you have to think about what is knowledge representation, right? Like the problems that we see with statistical learning, for example, are basically that the knowledge representation is not as good as some of these knowledge graphs that you have. But you also, besides the structure of knowledge, then learn about multiple representations of the same truth, right?
Right. So one thing is, let's say I have an item, a cork, a wine cork, and I have a shadow being projected. Depending on the angle may look like, the shadow may look like a circle or a square. It's not until you know both information you understand what you're projecting is the shadow of a cylinder. And the reason I say that is it's important that everybody here gets further involved in different ways of technologies that are coming. I am going to focus on AI, but there's other things that come, like blockchain for traceability and so forth. Is that how can individuals in your own project work on areas where it's using statistical modeling to various algos to higher order AI function and capability. Make it so that it's one of your 30% projects that you're exploring. Right. So as an example, somebody came to me, worked as a writer for PR. Like, I want to get in AI, but I don't have a technical degree. I'm not technical. Like first of all, you write for Microsoft, so I need you are definitely more technical than other writers. It's like, why don't you offer to do a speech for somebody who's technical, who's trying to speak to somebody who's not technical. The reason is that means you're going to work with somebody who's the expert in technology, try to help translate that language so that a wider audience can understand the different aspects of the technology. And you know what? It's actually valuable that you're not technical. Because you can ask the question, like, he just used the alphabet soup in acronym here. They're not going to know what that is. We need to go check that out and explore that. So there's ways in how to get involved. And I'll actually provide a list of podcasts as examples, depending on your different levels, to get more comfortable with different, and they're all based on use cases. There's something that people who are podcasts, as an example, and your area pieces, and it would be very presumptuous of me to say that, hey, this is the way to do it. What I can say, these are some of the building blocks that's needed at the city. Like, you know what? If this happened for their aerospace, I can apply it to the data center. And then you can start proposing and looking into projects and how to expand your tool set of capabilities and skills there.
So I just have to ask one last question on this knowledge thing, because I mean, I've never met anyone that figured so much out at such a young age, right?
Well, it didn't start there. Like, it was
Right.
very little. It was fairy tale, right? It was U.S. fairy tale, then it became a European fairy tale, then Asian fairy tale, but it's a little converted.
Yeah. So you know, people thought about the nature of knowledge. I think you kind of, you know, you probably have heard the map is not the territory idea, to always be mindful of your own acting processes, you know, and the fact that they are very interesting approach to critical, you know, methodology that that you use to learn about everything, really.
Yeah. It's, I always try to explore in the edge of the area of interest. Now, the edge is 360 degree of who you are, right? Figure out one that it resonates, something you're interested in. Because you know what? The fastest way to learn anything is make it fun. And I'm going to give an example. I have two kids, 10-year-old and 6-year-old boys. And like my 6-year-old knows how to do multiplication. So people are like, okay, your husband and yourself are engineers. It must be because you guys are really good at math. It's like, no, I can do this with other kids, right? I just have to make it fun. I have to make it fun. So I had a play date with 4 other kids, and they came over. They're all into Pokemon. So I had to learn about, I know so much about Pokemon, because remember, it's the audience that you're targeting. And I used that to go figure out ways. It's like, oh, there's this and this, and how do you subtract it? And then you get bonus points, and whoever gets it right gets to keep the Pokemon card. Wow. Right? And so at the end of a play date of 3 hours, I got them to do, you know, the math there. And the parents were just like, we should just have you come and be our teacher. It's like, no, I have a full-time job. But what I'm saying is, like, if you go present the different ideas and concepts and be something you're interested in, that's very important. And going back to work, 360 of the areas of things that's potential, find 1 or 2 areas that you're interested in. And I'm going to pitch the whole AI. It's like that will expand your knowledge about AI. And you'll find that you'll learn it significantly.
Great. So let's talk about AI for a little bit now.
Sure.
So how do you think that AI is going to change the world in the near term, based on your work at, you know, Microsoft, Google, Apple?
Yeah. By the end of the year, 75% of different applications will be leveraging AI in one form or another. When you have autocorrect in spelling, that's actually AI, right? So I want to give this span, like people think about robots fully formed having conversation. Like there's things that's being leveraged right now, right? The concept that the various systems you're working on understand New York City is a coastal city, and that Austin, Texas is landlocked. There's AI behind it, the knowledge graph specifically, understanding the world that we're in, both digitally and the physical. So considering certain trends that I'm seeing in the data, another reason why AI is going to be very important is the amount of data is doubling every 2 years. So at this current stage of information, if you like print it out, it's 2 football fields right now of just general knowledge, 2 football fields of paper, reams of paper filled up, but that's doubling every 2 years, right? And the reason why that's very important, and Cisco is very important in that, is like, how do you understand that? How do you do the traffic of it? Like there was another person that was talking about in the data set that the traffic of activity is also as important versus the end goal, right? So how to leverage that. There's also different like sensors and the fact that 5G is coming up. So one of the reasons why smartphones are able to be a computer in your pocket is you have that capability of communication protocol, right? So actually I see a lot of opportunity in Cisco is that there's going to be all this computing capability that's needed, and the infrastructure that Cisco provides is going to be needed even more. because now the latency is like it's this. There's like minimum latency. So that means you can offload a lot of the computation, which Cisco is the supporting of that infrastructure, right? So those are just some that I see applicable here. But think about the speed of information. You know, somebody said before, Thomas Friedman wrote a book that the world is flat. Now the word is fast. So like if things are faster than it's ever been, how does that change the environment? How can Cisco and the work that you're doing contribute that? And because you have so much data, you have to use AI, and with computing costs going down too.
Did you want to talk about any specific products, maybe, Microsoft?
Yeah. I'm very proud of the fact that I work on something called Knowledge Graph, which is a semantic understanding and organization of world data. It's a pretty large data set, right? And the reason that's so important, a lot of the things that we considered common sense, there's nothing common about it. You actually have to learn and be like socialized by that and told that for 18, 20 years of your life in school to understand this is the world that we live in. And that's what Knowledge Graph provides you, to understand that. And another reason why Knowledge Graph is important is with the data increasing, there's so many different sources. How do you know which one's ground truth? How do you know what sources to believe and not believe? It's a huge conflation problem. And also, there are systems that's in place about computer vision that simulates your eyes, right? Speech and hearing, those devices is your mouth and your ear. Sensors is your touch. But as humans, we do not, for any situation, have them all equal plane. There are some times when it's more important to hear something, to say something, to see something, to feel something, right? So how in these systems are you able to leverage that? And now that's the theoretical side and some of the application. You see that in all the search engines that you see, right? So there's Bing search, Microsoft search, Azure search. Any of the world information that is seen on Office, that is based from the Knowledge Graph and the Bing technology work that's happened there. So one specifically that was released last year is I automatically can bring in information about stocks and geography into Excel, right? And understand that when I do and put in Paris, London, Berlin, and I go review that, the system is smart enough to understand how are all of these things, this information the same. Oh, these are European cities. Because if I did Paris, Mississippi, Atlanta, and so forth, then I know that there is a Paris, Texas. I know, right? So by understanding the things around it semantically, you can understand context and truly get the idea of things. So this is something for stock, for geography, and you can start planning that. Another one is the back-end knowledge behind virtual assistant. So we have various apps and systems that powers that.
So you're able to get more user intent, more context about the user, and just have better, results for that user, right? Help them basically achieve their intents. So there's also a downside, obviously, and I think that you've done a lot of work in this area. When you think about AI, you have issues where your data is being used to maybe persuade you to do things, to buy things, that maybe you don't necessarily need, or maybe to implement products that aren't ready for prime time and in safety critical areas. But you have a lot of thoughts about this.
Yeah. So one of the things we do is we give multiple perspectives of information, and we also have a checklist and different pillars with AI systems, right? So number one, Microsoft has been a forefront in this. Very, extremely proud of it because it needs to happen, right? Things are happening very quickly, as I said before. And so these are frameworks and questions you're asked as you design different systems. It's like, is your data diverse? How is it being represented? Are there ways to address it and be more inclusive in who is targeting to? And there's various systems and tools within Microsoft to go help you determine that. Another thing for specifically the knowledge graph, I have a 3D representation. It's like you can see it as like a AutoCAD kind of representation of the world knowledge and information. So as I look at a certain section, it's like, are there holes? Well, that means I need to go make sure that data is being represented. So I can see that it's a cylinder and not just assume it's a ball, as the previous example. And so it's faith, it's fairness, accountability, traceability, and ethics.
And the responsible AI?
For responsible AI. And then another thing, I work with IEEE. It's a standard body about ethical design as one of the industry experts there. And because of the success of some of the information we've been doing, and we have a certification process there, NIST, which is the National Institute of Standard Technology, are considering adopting some of these things. And as Hugo stated before, I'm part of the World Economic Forum. And there, I am responsible for how does emerging technology have implication. And I had two opportunities there. One is to join the council in AI, or one was to join the council in production. And the reason I picked production is that I can have influence, and my colleagues there, on how policy and industry runs that affects many people versus doing something that's more theoretical. I'm very much application-based. And that in part of this equation is the whole system itself, the environment, the people, the company, the different countries, and how they interact with each other.
Yeah, so we've also seen that there's some biases that AI systems tend to exaggerate, if you will, because they're learning off of social media, they're learning off of the language that we all use, but somehow when they learn, they could go off in directions that aren't great, and diversity, and the people using AI and training AI.
Yeah. So I wanted to give a couple of, yes, there are those cases, but how do you do something about it? And I'm going to give a couple of examples from the different companies I've worked at. So for Nest, which makes IoT devices, smart devices such as thermostats, smoke detector, and cameras. The thermostat, it has a default setting, and then for a week or 2 weeks, you go interact with it and then optimize for your system, for yourself. And it did represent some of the people that did the testing as well as developing that algorithm, which were mostly guys. And the reason, I don't know, I think everybody has felt this, is the women's like, I'm freezing, and the men is like, what are you talking about? This weather, this temperature is perfect. Okay, this is where my curiosity helps solve those problems. Like, why is that? So the men and women have, because of our circulatory system, have a 5-degree delta of what is considered comfortable. 5 degrees is a lot, right? But the people who designed the algorithm for the Nest thermostat were guys, so everything was indexed to be a little bit cooler of what comfort is. And so in a family, or in a situation where there are men and women in a household, it's like, hey, I just bought an AI machine learning thermostat. And the woman's like, well, it's kind of cold. It's like, no, it's smart. It can predict everything. I'm comfortable. It knows, right? And then now the woman's like, well, I just basically have to defy this AI system to be comfortable. But that's not right, right? That means it is over-indexing and stating that the men's state of comfort is valid. And then the women is like, it's not really that cold. I'm like, no, it is cold. I'm wearing a jacket here that's like pretty thick. And so what is like, there's an easy solution. And it's because I'm one of the few women, I was like, I understand why this is happening, is that put the default temperature to be at 2.5 from that delta range. So both men and women have equal chance to interact with the system and teach it, versus saying one is default correct and the other person has to be uncomfortable enough to change the default. Those little things matter. And so how interaction and understanding these biases, do you think those men knew? They're like, I didn't know it was that big of a temperature delta. It explains a lot. It's like, when you see a whole group of women, it's like, I'm cold. Does anybody have a blanket? Right? I need a heater in my office. Like, how can you not notice all these like signals, by the way? Is that now here's the science behind it. Here's the reason behind it. and then it got corrected, right? So here's an example there. Another example is, when you do searches, I remember doing a search where I asked for quotes from famous engineers. They were all men. Is that true? No women engineers said anything witty or smart, that's not true, right? And so it wasn't until I had to put another disclaimer that female engineer, famous quote. But you remember, that's all friction points. So how do you make sure there's equal representation? And so also in Microsoft, with Bing Search and other search for Microsoft Search, Bing Search, and Azure Search, is how do you make sure there's multi-perspective so you don't only get one viewpoint? So that's another thing that's been solved, right? And that's because diverse people came and said, you're skewed one way or another. There's better ways to do it. And so, I would love to see every one of us here participate, because I see a host of different experiences, different colors, different faces, so many different ways, right? And being part of the system makes sure that we also have a voice there.
So kind of building on that, the idea of expanding AI by including more democratization, if you will, right? The technology is getting better. You don't have to be technical. You could be non-technical. Can you talk about that? How does a non-technical person get involved with AI?
Yeah. So first thing is you do have to have a baseline knowledge. I will provide a couple of podcasts that was very interesting in use cases, so you can understand that, number one. Number two is, as the example of the writer, figuring out how to get perspectives of those who are not necessarily as tech savvy in AI involved is important, because there's so many things you can learn from other industry and application, right? So in Apple, they do a lot of use case study analysis, and usually those use cases totally different industry. So for instance, there's ethical design for UX, user experience, right? There are safety and other areas of concerns when you make various systems in design. How can you make that version for what we have here? So your knowledge there can apply here. Another thing is Hippocratic oath for doctors. What are the things there that we can apply to engineering and the work that we're doing here? So there are things there that you can apply that's not necessarily, you have to have a machine learning, data science background to get engaged in the system. And one of the things I really do like about the World Economic Forum is they bring people from industry, academia, and government involved, different countries, different regions, to solve these problems, right?
Yeah. It's interesting to note that, when it comes to AI, one of the first applications of AI is kind of AI to develop AI. So they call it auto ML. So it just makes it easier if you have data, right? And Microsoft does lead in this kind of technology, definitely. So that's another factor there.
And to add to that is, think about Excel. There's been aspects of Excel and building blocks where you don't need a technical degree to start building out different systems and macros and so forth, right? And by just having the tool available, we found people using it in medical, to Wall Street, to manufacturing floor, right? Far beyond what the original creator thought of. But making it so that people, individuals with various backgrounds can interact with the system is a big one. So visualization of knowledge is an area also I work on. Excellent.
I'm going to throw in a question regarding autonomous systems for mission-critical applications, self-driving cars, that sort of thing. I don't know if you want to comment on this. If you have any views, some people think that it's around the corner, that your car will be fully autonomous very quickly. Others think it's still far out. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I still think it's a couple of years out for sure. Yeah. There's reasons why it takes a long time. You can give a kid who's 16 a driver's license. That doesn't mean they're good at it. It takes a lot of years of driving to get good at that. But remember, before that, they had 16 years to understand the system of the physical world, right? And we're pretty good. We are one of the most, like, there's a reason why we're in the top of the food chain and so forth. And so in that sense, is there an aspect that it can be automated? Absolutely, right? But the variability right now is a little bit too high. But there's opportunities. You know, people are making such advancement in this space. Yeah. So it's still to come, but at this stage, there's still a couple of years.
Yeah, I think you're extending the statistical learning with the knowledge graph, so you have deeper representations of what's going on. That's going to be crucial, right?
Right. And also, as a driver, I personally may make different decisions than you will. Who is right in this scenario? Yeah. Like an accident or avoidance of an accident that may have a pedestrian or others that may come to harm. I may behave differently than you do, but who's right or wrong about that? And there's a lot of variation there. And also, culturally, Western culture has a different perspective than Asia and Europe and Africa, right? So how do you make sure that whatever system you have play also represents the culture and environment that you're in? Like, you won't have camels here, but it is something that you see in Dubai. Like, and they're not going to move. Like, they're very stubborn animals. Like, you can honk versus horses, they will move aside. Camels don't give up, you know, they don't give a thing, right? And so I try to also make sure I don't only consider Western views of things in the problem.
That's a great answer. So tell me this is not fair. We just talked about this a little bit,
yeah.
but we were talking about you know, some of the key issues that society is facing right now. Mental health issues, how you know, some dramatic increase in the problem that we're seeing, you know, as a society. The predictions that it's going to get much worse. That it's the technology that basically drives people away from human interaction is correlated with a lot of the problem. How do we, as you know, and technologists and Cisco and you know, Microsoft, kind of address that?
So we do have focus on community building, right? One thing I really loved about LinkedIn, which was also acquired by Microsoft, is the community building aspect of it, but it's not just on the online, right? Because of the social network that's happening is, hey, I'm going to be in San Francisco. Who are the other people I know there? Maybe there's a chance for me to actually have face-to-face interaction and those encouragements that happen. I think that's really great. So there are different ways technology can be applied. Whenever possible, it's very important to have the human interaction. So there was a research with monkeys where the monkey had a stuffed animal that can give, you know, a lot of physical love and hugs, but no food. And then there was another robot that was mechanical, no sign of affection, but gave food. That baby monkey picked the animal, or the stuffed animal robot that gave love. And I thought that was a good representation of how important it is as humans to have that face-to-face interaction and relationship, and as well as connections. You asked about what are the things that made me successful and so forth. I did have a great support system. Whether it was my family, my husband, a group of friends that were in similar situations, is very important. And I give this example. When I was a first-time mom, I actually founded a Korean moms group because some of the advice and cultural was so different. And I was like, for instance, my mom's like, don't go outside for a month. And you can only have seaweed soup, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 30 days. So I was like, okay. And I remember my husband's like, just don't do it. But culturally, it was a very sensitive thing. And so having others that I was able to brainstorm like of ways to hack around this was very interesting. And it also, like, it brought that culture back into my kids, and we're still friends. And for instance, I'm going to go meet them and have a barbecue I live in Seattle, Redmond area in Washington, this Saturday, right? And that's 10 years ago. And whenever my husband's like, wait, and he's, to give some reference, my last name, Velastegui, is the wonderful last name of my husband, who is Ecuadorian. And so understanding different interracial families and some of the challenges, like he's like, you know, your parents can't even pronounce my last name. It's like, we've only been married for like 16, 17 years. Do you think it'll ever change? And I was like, honey, it's not gonna happen. Because Korean language doesn't have the letter V. Like, so they can't pronounce it. It sounds the same to them. And so understanding some of those like idiosyncrasy, having that support system, going back to what that is very important. And that really does help, not just on the personal level, but in your career.
Yeah, so like you were mentioning the importance of, FaceTime, spending time together as teams,
Yes.
co-locating, all of
Yes.
that. Of course, we still do the WebExes and all of that.
Yes, yes.
It's all useful.
Right, but even with the technology, how do you engage so that everybody have a voice, that you don't have an over-indexing to those only that's present in the meeting, right? What are etiquettes in place, right? Just like a social environment, what are the etiquettes in place to go interact with that so everybody can connect and so forth. So like, for instance, I don't start a meeting with like people that I work with remotely, just start talking about work. Because I don't do that when I'm in the office face-to-face. I'm like, hey, Hugo, okay, we got this call. Let's just like, it's like, how was your weekend? Yeah. What was it like? Oh, my God. Yeah, the human factor. It's like, I heard that there's a lot of rainstorms happening in your side of the world. You know, I don't do well with rain because I'm from California, right? It's like, oh, you got nothing. When you call rain, it's like a little drizzle out here, right? I was like, I know, but that doesn't mean that things don't happen because of that. So it breaks things down. And so it is that should also apply as you interact in the digital world.
So you mentioned that, one key success factor in business, actually in everything that you do. We haven't really covered it, and you've kind of alluded to it a little bit, but maybe you want to talk about what is the key success factor?
For me, it's curiosity, like truly, because curiosity means you're interested and you'll explore further. And the example with my kids and their friends and teaching them about math is because their curiosity of something of interest. That's why they learned math in 3 hours, how to add and subtract, right? And it'll get you far because it will be also a motivation factor. And don't lose that. And that's also some of the things that I've actually learned so much from my own kids, is that in many ways they teach me more than I thought. I thought it's going to be a one-way street. I'm teaching them. But I actually learned a lot about curiosity and staying curious, because that's actually what helped me go. It's like, and also number 2 is recognize waves of activities that's happening. Don't go against the tide. Go use the tide to get to that next level. So I actually saw certain tides of emerging technology, and it's like, hey, I'm going to go on that and ride with it, right? And part of that is with the curiosity and the waves, is then you'll feel more comfortable by taking some of those risks, right? I'm not saying take the whole 100%, but maybe 30%, 10%, and so forth.
So last question before we get into questions. So please get ready. Maybe you can come up to the microphone here if you have any questions. But specific advice for women and underrepresented groups.
So what I have found, as well as data and research has stated, is that women are very involved and concentrate on their work and sometimes don't invest in themselves, an underrepresented group as well. But it's incredibly important. And the way I found this is my way of hacking this, is I thought of myself as a company, a startup, Velastegui Consulting. As Velastegui Consulting, I can't just be on this one thing and be narrow-minded. I had to think about roadmap planning, other skill set, are there other verticals or market I should be considering? And when you see that, you're going to go invest in that. whether it be 10%, 20%, to go learn that skill or acquire that. And so since the behavior I've seen is that they're very like focused on the job, but not that maybe outside of the boundary of the job. If I remove myself and make it so that I'm a company myself, and the job is the success and advancement or expansion of understanding, then that will give me a way for me to consider it that way. Because I find a lot of it's like, oh, I can do that, but it's for myself. It's priority number 4, right? The thing is, these things really do have a significant impact in your career. An example I give is that, and most people will not believe this to be, but I was, for Myers-Briggs, borderline introverted, right? So you see me speaking here, and it's like, doesn't seem that way. But I actually use some of the, I joined something called Toastmaster, which helps with public speaking, because I found that it was a very important skill set to get to the next level, to be able to speak and present your idea, to negotiate that, to get others to follow with you. You know, those are things for a leader. And Toastmaster was able to break it down. And basically, I ended up changing my letters to and my personality. Think about that. You basically had a systematic way that you can then leverage to change your personality, or the way it came, the magnitude. I was like borderline, I was extroverted, but borderline introverted, to being a solid extroverted, right? So if I could change my personality, I can do anything, right? And I kind of use some of those like tools and understanding to apply to how I even acquire knowledge and information, to how I engage. It's like small groups of people. And remember, another thing with Toastmaster, you have to present to other people, right? Because you get a feedback loop. How is that all very important? And I give another example about YouTube videos. There was a video and there was research about carving a duck from a piece of wood. And people, they said after they watched 1 hour, 10 hour, how confident you felt that you can do the same. So the people who are 10 hours, like, yes, I can do it. I can do it in a couple of hours. And then they actually try it. They were not able to do anything. So it is not just theoretical. There's great. You learn, and it's true. I did take classes. I listened to podcasts, read books. But it's the application that really solidifies it. And so figure out ways to solidify and test it out. That's why I say go take that 20% project. Because your theoretical, great. But when you actually apply it, that 20% project, that's when it gets really honed into your skill set.
So while people decide the questions, do we have any questions on WebEx? We have a question here. That was the idea, yes. Sorry, I didn't make that clear.
Thank you.
Hi.
First of all, you're very pretty.
Oh, thank you.
So my question is, actually, I have 2 questions. Okay to have 2 questions?
As many as you want.
Okay. So what do you think of the AI bubbles? Because now, those days, people think any new technology they're not familiar with, they don't know how to use it. They call it AI. And they always say AI is going to destroy human being in 50 years, and the AI never did.
Yes.
And this is the first question. And second question is, I look at your LinkedIn, I noticed that you were in the Stanford Law School. You had that experience.
Yes.
How does that experience affect your career?
Yeah. So the first question is the AI bubble and how true that is and what to do about it. So any technology needs to have some rules of engagement, right? To give an example, when the first cars got developed, a lot of people died, not just the driver, but the people in the environments and so forth. And rules came into place to regulate as well as give guidance to that, right? So what I've done is that since there is nothing like that with respect to AI, machine learning, and so forth, and some of the labelings associated with it around the world is actually the #1 question I get. And the reason why that's important is when I have this World Economic Forum, 17 minutes, data-driven, it takes to make sure everybody has the same understanding of what these systems mean. instead of talking about the problem itself, I had to do 17 minutes to make sure everybody's on the same baseline. So that's why I work with IEEE to figure out standards and certification, and that can also then be adopted by different regulatory environment as well. So that's number one. The second question, can you repeat it so that everybody's remembered?
Yeah, you had a Stanford Law School
Yeah.
experience. How does that affect your career? Because I used to have this kind of like idea too. I want to become a lawyer.
Yeah.
You know?
So just to clarify, the Stanford Law is a certification, not a degree. I don't want to state that it's over-indexed that. And it's a certification about board governance, right? So specifically on that. And the reason is, as an executive, as you go higher up, understanding the motivation of the board and the CEO means I can be a better executive to support them, number one.
Okay.
Number two is I also want to be on the board eventually. I need to understand the language and so forth associated with it. I'm very happy to say that the companies I work with supported advanced education and had a budget. And I always use it every year. I always use it, right? And so that's what's helped. Another thing is, like I said, I have a curiosity about different things. So patent law was one of my areas, and international IP. My husband's like, please don't tell people that's like your hobby. It's like not normal. But it's actually been very helpful in the sense that I actually got an opportunity to give guidance and advise the president of South Korea, right? And he wasn't the president at the time. He was the presidential candidate with 10% of winning. And he said, I want somebody in my labor department to basically enact startup incubators, and who worked at Apple and Google, who was Korean, that did incubators. So they called me. And what happened is, because of the scandal with the current Republican president, with the president of Samsung, my guy won. And so I ended up being the advisor of the president of Korea, and ended up changing 3 laws to increase the concept of limited liability and all these other things. So that law degree, or not the law certificate, helped me understand some of the nuances that maybe I wouldn't have done.
So we should try different areas, even.
As long as you're interested.
Yeah.
The key thing is as long as you're interested, right? Because then you'll retain the information and you'll act upon it. That's the main thing. You can learn it, but if you don't act upon it, it's not going to stay.
Yeah.
Great question, thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, I have knowledge graph background. My PhDs have something to do with it. So after that, we can talk about technical details. I don't want to waste.
Okay.
So we have another question here.
Yeah, thank you very much, both of you, Yulo and Sophia. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Actually, related to one of the previous questions, with AI coming into our lives every day more and more, you mentioned 75% of apps being somehow leveraging
Yes.
the AI. What is your take on how do we humans adapt to that so we're still important and relevant in the future?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of fear of being replaced.
Yeah. The human ingenuity is the most comprehensive. The fact that humans literally reside everywhere around the world, and all the complexity and the variation speaks to us. So my main thing is concentrating is that what are the guidelines to make sure that some of the things, the morality, as well as the things, the ethical viewpoints that we have, that our systems also represent that. And that there's a feedback loop that's associated with it. Is because 5 years ago, when you did a search online, when you did a big search online, and you looked up self-driving car, you would have gotten a result of movies and books, right? Now it's actual vehicles. You can purchase some of these features and so forth. So the world changes and it's dynamic. And human is the most dynamic system, so to speak, that's out there. So what I'm saying is figure out ways to work collaboratively with the different systems in place. Because you know what? 200 years ago, I wouldn't have these glasses. this is with LASIK people, I would have been considered disabled, right? There would have been no way for me to be with the regular society because I would have been considered blind, right? And it wasn't that long ago. And so what I say is figure out, and I gave some suggestion about getting it more incorporated and working together there. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Another great question. Thank you. Do we have time for one more? One more question. Okay.
Hi, this is Rachna. It was nice to hear you talk about AI. I have a question where, I have two kids and they're pretty young, 3 and 5. And often it crosses my mind that, when it comes to our kids and younger generation, we kind of, still rely on old school ways where we want them to kind of experience like the, reality of the world, like go out in nature and all of that. So with AI in picture, what do you think is the most kind of harmful or a challenging thing that we see for our younger generation?
So actually, I am very for the kids playing outside and interacting because the variable in nature is incredibly high, number one. And it's a system of engagement that is it's so deep-seated that you can learn so much from that. So I very much believe in that. Number two is whatever the education system, the system is that there is not one way to find the answer. There's multiple ways to go figure out the solution at hand and to actually be in a system of learning to love to learn. People are going to predict things about the future, right? There's a couple of questions associated with it. A lot of things we just don't know, right? But if we learn the process of learning and how to address those things, whatever things come up, we will figure out a way to solve it. To give an example, my mom and dad grew up on a rice paddy farm in South Korea, third world at the time. And then they ended up working in Manhattan and having a thriving business. The likelihood of that happening and then they're like, yeah, I see myself in New York City doing this, incredibly low, right? But they were able to address by different things like education is very important, to applying the education is very important, but also learning to love to learn. And it's not something you do once you finish school. It doesn't mean it ends. Something you should continue doing. Plus, it helps with Alzheimer's, right? To shave that off. That's another side benefit. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So please join me in thanking Sophia. Oh, Serpil has one comment.
One last question for everybody who's here. Where can people start learning more about AI? I think you mentioned some podcasts.
Yeah.
How can we relay that information back to the group?
So what I'll do is there's 3 or 4 podcasts, and I have different level explaining it. Data Matter is one. I will send a list. Can I send it to you, and then you can send it out to the distribution? I think that's a really good one. Obviously, there's books as well, but I feel that first I have to get people excited. A podcast is a good way to go do that. Do it while you're brushing your teeth, right? Start there, because the use case. The reason I selected these 4 is the use case is very interesting, and they did it in an entertaining way that I really appreciate. So I felt comfortable sending it to my mother, and she's like, okay, I don't know what you think I do. I was like, just listen to this one podcast. It actually correlates to the area you're interested in. And she's like, oh, yeah, that was really fun. And so that was interesting. She's like, Sophia, are you sure you meant to send it to your mother? I don't do anything with AI. I was like, I know. This is something that you're interested in. So I think that storytelling is very important to ingest that information. Okay?
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Sophia.
Thank you.
And thank you all for attending. Fantastic.
We're going to have one more session. I just first want to thank you, Sophia and Hugo, for moderating. We're going to have one more WIT session at the end of this month, and our guest speaker is Kelly Kramer. So I'll announce that later. Thank you.